Good afternoon and welcome to the second segment of the Dawn Lafferty Hawksprung Winter Spring 2021 webinar series. My name is Dr. Jerry Steele, Assistant Professor and Chair of the Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership at Russell Sage College. This webinar series is offered under the auspices of the Hawksprung Center at Russell Sage College and in association with the New York State Council of School Superintendents. The Hawksprung Center was established in memory of Dawn Lafferty Hawksprung, the principal of Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. Dawn was a member of Albany Cohort 6 and had just completed her first semester in the doctoral program when that tragic day occurred. The mission of the center is to promote mental health and school safety. Our topic this afternoon is self-care for children, parents, and educators in the COVID-19 era. Additional webinars will be held on April 28th and May 19th. Now, please let me introduce our panelist and moderator for our program this afternoon. Our first panelist is Dr. Hashina Baez. Dr. Baez is an internationally renowned mindful leadership coach, curriculum developer, and educational consultant. After graduating from the Summer Principal Academy Administrative Graduate Program at Columbia University, she went on to serve the program as a leadership coach and summer instructor. Hashina has taught, led schools and districts in New York for almost 20 years. Internationally, Hashina provides administrators and directors with high impact training in mindful leadership to promote whole child increased learning outcomes globally. She is a former special education teacher, principal, and director of pupil personnel in New York. Hashina is currently the Chief Implementation Officer for the Contentment Foundation, a global wellness organization. She has also formed her own consulting business regarding mindful leadership. Dr. Baez received her doctorate in educational leadership from Russell Sage College, and she is a proud member of New York City Cohort 6. Our second panelist is Dr. Mauricia Ray Digovaya. Dr. Digovaya has served as a community superintendent, executive director of the Brooklyn South Support Center, and is currently the executive superintendent of Queens South for the New York City Department of Education. She is a leader with over 20 years of experience in the field of education and is committed to transforming communities and redefining generational legacies via high-quality teaching and learning experiences in public schools. Throughout her career, she has led and supported schools with the firm belief that a child's zip code, origin, race, or class is not a predetermined hindrance to learning, but an opportunity for a new narrative that tells a story of success and achievement for all students who attend public school. Dr. Digovaya also received her doctorate in educational leadership from Russell Sage College. She is a proud member of New York City Cohort 3. Our final panelist is Jacinda Comboy Esquire, AKA Jazz. She is the general counsel at the New York State Council of School Superintendents. At the council, Jazz provides advice regarding education issues, holds legal conferences, and especially spearheads the council's women's initiative. She also frequently presents to superintendents, negotiates superintendents' contracts, and assists superintendents in various legal matters. Recently, Jazz was awarded the Friend of the American Association of School Administrators Award at the 2020 National Conference in San Diego for her work on behalf of female education leaders who are striving to become superintendents. And finally, our moderator for our discussion this afternoon is Dr. Laura Fayou. Dr. Fayou is currently the president of the Leadership for Educational Achievement Foundation, formerly the superintendent of the City School District of New Rochelle, and prior to that, she worked for the New York City Department of Education as overseeing the superintendents in the city, and the Office of the Superintendents and School Support, District 79's Alternative Schools, Office of Adult and Continuing Education, and a series of other undertakings within the department. Dr. Feo served in the Division of Equity and Access to support the several initiatives in closing the achievement gap and fostering initiatives to support our most vulnerable students. Laura also serves as a member of the advisory committee for the doctoral program in educational leadership at Russell Sage College. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Laura to begin this afternoon's discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Steele, and I welcome everyone to this session today. I'm very excited to be moderating a panel of individuals who are focused and dedicated to self-care and talking about how that influences what we do in schools, especially given our current pandemic. So self-care is a very important initiative, not only to the Russell Sage colleges, but also to the New York State Council of School Superintendents who have focused on it over the years, including the Wellness Committee and the Women's Initiative at the Council. And so we look forward to hearing from each of you. I have a series of questions to ask. We'll rotate it, and then we can each build on each other's answers to give the fullest perspective of your experience to our audience today. So I thank you all for being here, and we'll dig right in and get started. So for the first question, maybe we'll turn it over to Jazz and start with you. How do you build a base and a common language about self-care?
Thanks, Laura. So I have the privilege of working with educational leaders and primarily superintendents every day. And the one thing that I think they all have in common is that they are extremely hard workers, primarily type A individuals. But what comes with that is a lot of times a lack of self-care. So they work around the clock. They rarely take time off. If they are on vacation, they are frequently working, sending emails, dealing with a crisis at their district. And they're just generally not people who focus in on self-care. So I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting on what I've seen from our membership at NISCUS, and have been talking a lot about self-care. And some of this also comes from my personal experiences. And I'll just tell one quick story. When I was working in a private law firm, I was given 3 weeks of vacation. And everyone got 3 weeks of vacation. And I knew that I could take 5 days in a row. I could take 1 week off. And after that, I knew I could take a couple of long weekends. And then I knew I could never touch that 3rd week of vacation or even think about taking a 3rd week of vacation. And that was never written anywhere. No one ever told it to me. It was just something I knew because of the culture in the law firm that I worked in. And so the reason why I'm talking about this is because if you are one of those educational leaders who works around the clock and answers emails at 2 a.m. in the morning and sends emails and text messages and works all weekend and works on your vacation, not only are you doing a disservice to yourself, a huge disservice to yourself, you're setting a model to tell everyone in your district and everyone that you work for that that's the expectation. And so they will have the same experience that I had, that you're really not allowed to take vacation. You're not allowed to take a non-working vacation. And you need to live in this culture where we respond instantaneously and where we wear our lack of sleep as a badge of honor. And we do all these things that can be very, very self-destructive. and can create a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, which then can lead to a lot of health issues. So I think for a starting point, if we're going to talk about self-care and how do we build a base and common language around self-care, as educational leaders, you have got to model what self-care is. And we all have to start living differently and modeling the kind of care we want to see for our colleagues and the people that we work with. And certainly this year has been so stressful and extremely high speed, high pressure. You know, and I'll tell you, you cannot continue like that without really suffering some real both mental and physical consequences. And if you're not going to take care of yourself in that way, I would really urge you to think about the impact you're having on your employees. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Baez. I saw you shaking your head a few times, and I imagine you have quite a bit to add here.
Thank you so much, Jazz. It was wonderful to really be able to utilize my role as the CEO of Mindfully Led and as a proponent of developing a common language. In my work with superintendents, principals, teachers, and parents, it became really important to develop a common definition of what self-care was first. And when we look at self-care and defining it as this ability to curate and cultivate wellness in our life, I'm able to really do this in a meaningful way through the Contentment Foundation as the Chief Implementation Officer, where we believe that well-being is a birthright for all humanity. Like, we were born to be well. And with this philosophy, the goal would then be to really not only cultivate this in our lives personally as leaders, but to build sustainable structures around self-care within districts. And in order to do this, everyone with a face has to understand what it means to be well, what self-care looks like, feels like, and sounds like. We have to literally break down any bridges or barriers so that they're able to access these tools on a consistent and sustainable level. In order to do this, it is wonderful, the opportunities that I get to work with school districts all over New York and even internationally, working in 8 countries. We look at how we assess the needs in terms of leadership, readiness, and responsibilities as it pertains to how they are personally taking care of themselves. We look at what the demands are of teachers and shifting from this hybrid to remote and all of these things that come along the way, which really impacts their psychological flexibility. So self-care looks very different. We've shown them how to turn their everyday routines to rituals around self-care. Like, how are you taking moments to just mindfully breathe throughout the day? What are you doing to cultivate care in little ways so that they are able to develop a sustainable routine so that wellness is not something that they do, it becomes authentically and intrinsically who they are.
So just to tap into what Jazz and Hashina are offering, I think that in order to build a common language, I think language begins with mindset and mental models around who are we in the space of self-care. So there is the aspect of the leader understanding that their own self-care rituals. I listened to Jazz speak and I was like, girl, I have passed that. I meditate every morning. I work out every morning. I just got a Peloton, so I'm very excited about that. And the idea that the leader is only able to lead as to wherever their level is, I think is something that does need to be considered. So in order to have the mindset of self-care, you have to really examine where are you within your own self-care process. Who are you when you're eating? Who are you when you're sleeping? Who are you in a conversation? And I think from that, if you're able to systematize it in your life, you'll be able to systematize it within the leadership as a parent and even with students, right? So mindset means a lot, right? Where are you in your thinking about what's capable around self-care? I've often done a meditation with my team, and the systematizing goes into the agenda. So often we begin meetings with mindfulness, and one of the meditations and visualizations I give them is that they're holding a cup and I'm pouring water into their cup. and I'm going to keep pouring the water until it overflows. And then somebody else comes with a cup and they get the water that's in the overflow. And that visualization is really important within school leadership. Like, you give from the overflow. You don't give from your cup. Giving from your cup means that you're going to be depleted. It means that you're not going to have enough to share beyond, right? So if you're giving from a place where you're in the overflow and people are drinking from the overflow, then you're playing win-win games. I think all too often within education, we position families, leaders, teachers, and so forth to play these win-lose games where, and then they actually end up being kind of lose-lose games because no one's walking away feeling like the victor and people feel tired and depleted. And in a year like we had this year, that required us to consistently operate and engage in the unknown, it is imperative that people take a moment to really humanize the work and what it means to step into spaces where the breath is the life giver, where it means the pause is the life giver, where we take a moment to do laughter meditation in the middle of a meeting. And people often found those things at one point trite, and they would consider social emotional learning a soft skill. But I think after all the loss that's been experienced this year, we have come to understand that social emotional learning actually is the skill of skills to have. You know, order precedes learning. I think we're walking into a season in education where social emotional wellness will precede learning. So the mindset and the culture and the systematizing of those pieces is what actually will help you build the language. But it's only through the work of being a practitioner that you're going to be able to do so. So the principle, when you go on the loudspeaker, it's, you know, it's greetings, everyone. Let's take a moment to take a breath here. And throughout the day, you're going to face moments of stress. And what does it mean to breathe properly? So when you're inhaling correctly, your belly is going to expand. Are you aware of that? Because so many people breathe incorrectly. So something as simple as using the breath as an anchoring place to begin practicing what it means to calm down, what it means to de-stress, can actually change and shift language in a school community that helps put social emotional learning, mindfulness, yoga instruction, and just movement in a way that feels good, because feeling good is a strategy, and you want to be able to utilize that strategy to navigate through the difficulty.
Well, thank you all. For the second question, I know we touched on it a little bit about the crisis, and we talked a little bit about mindfulness, but maybe we can start and think about what exactly is mindfulness, maybe for some of our audience members that may not be completely familiar with the idea and how broad a spectrum it is, and how is it specifically important. And I know we touched on this a little bit, but a little bit deeper, how is it important in this crisis to do that for not only educators, but for parents, for children at home and in school? Hashina, I see you nodding your head again. Maybe you want to take a start on this one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. And thank you so much, Maury. That was such a thorough explanation. When we think about the definition of mindfulness, it is defined by John Kabat-Zinn as a non-judgmental focus on the present moment. And this idea of non-judgmentally focusing on your present moment from the lens of a student or a parent, as we look at how this can impact and shape and shift what is happening in homes, as parents are now becoming co-teachers, and they are actually seeing in the most clear way the plight of the educator. I think an amazing space for empathy is being developed with some of the work that I'm doing in various districts in New York City with parent coordinators, with actual parents sitting in on PTA meetings and teaching them the skills and tools to develop executive functioning so that their child is organized. We're showing them things like, what does Zoom etiquette look like? How do you set up your child for successful learning? We're talking to parents about ways to heal at home so that they're using mindfulness practices where they are waking up every morning and they're breathing before class. They're setting a gratitude circle with their children so that children understand that gratitude is the antidote to anxiety. Gratitude is the antidote to depression. Gratitude is the antidote to isolation. So we're teaching them the power that they have as parents to partner with educators in ensuring that their children have the skills that they need to be successful and not just survive COVID, but thrive through it. And it's been wonderful. We're seeing as well the amazing impact of mindfulness on educators, because educators are, for the first time, tasked with things that they themselves didn't know how to do in terms of technology integration and how they can manage their own stress as they navigate this world. So many of the workshops that I lead with teachers is really about how do we develop psychological flexibility so that we have the mental and emotional fortitude to navigate our personal lives and our professional lives, understanding that self-awareness is going to be a huge key, and being able to cultivate enough mental space to curate the conditions for them to be well. We also speak to them about things like emotional empathy. How can they understand what their students are going through and at various levels as they navigate the world around them? It has been so powerful to even see the principals and superintendents joining these calls and working collectively as a community to heal. So we've been hosting healing circles in districts in New York City and on Long Island, so that everyone understands that the idea of being comfortable with being uncomfortable is what everyone is saying. But the reality is that this has been a traumatizing event. We want to be able to name it so we can tame it. We want to be able to cultivate the language around what it looks like to be well in the midst and in the face of. And mindfulness has been the single most focus point so that they can develop systematic systems and structures around being well. So at all levels, every stakeholder now has this ability to tap into their skills so that they don't forget their training in the face of trauma. They actually push through because they have the fortitude to do so.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the definition and for the deep explanation there. Maury, is there something you'd like to say a little bit about the crisis?
No, I think Hashina really covered it. I would also go just to the place, so just keeping, if you want to keep it simple, what feels good and what feels right for your family. I think that there's been a lot of desire to keep up with what has been delivered. And I would charge parents with remembering who leads your home, right? And what feels good in your home. And I say this not only as a Department of Education an employee, but as a mother. There were times during this year where I was like, that's not going to work for my family. That's not going to work for my children. And I also know the distinction between what it means to be a good soldier at work and what it means to be Mommy Maury. And you also get to look at your children and decide, what works for them and what does not. Some children are able, like in New York, we've had, the hybrid and the blended model. And so that requires sometimes kids are coming in, kids are home, kids are coming in, kids are home. There are children who are resilient within that face of change. And there are other children who are like, no, I need more consistency. So being the parent also, because I've had parents bring things to me that I'm just like, wow, you're trusting the DOE with that? Okay, that's your family. That's your legacy. That's your home, right? And own that. And what feels good in that space, right? And where can you leverage the work of the department? Where could you leverage the work of the teacher and the principal and so forth to really help and assist your home be the place that is really truly the sanctuary? But that requires a pause sometimes from families to really take a breath and say, okay, who are we or who are we going to be in this space? And giving children the tools that they need as well. We are on we're about to go back. And right now in New York City, we've opened up elementary, middle, and high. And within that space, though, there's still COVID-19 happening. And we're still having people who are getting sick. We're still having people who are passing away from it. Then you say, okay, what's it going to look like to bring everyone back and help prepare school communities for that and families for that? One thing I've talked about with central offices is thinking about how are schools bringing parents in for tours, letting them see what's going on in the physical space, helping them feel secure, helping them feel safe, and knowing that, hey, because we've got these pieces in place, we're also looking to help control the environment and making sure that it's well for the children. And parents, when you're home and you're helping you transitioning your child back into the physical space, this is what it looks like, sounds like, feels like. And parents saying, you know what, this is what works within my home, and this is what doesn't work. I think giving the agency over. And that's what I think we're really in a space of, like, where does your agency lie? And I would love to know, as an executive superintendent, that my families feel empowered enough to really speak what works for them, and not so much about what are we going to do for you, but here's who we are and where we stand, and we're leaning in. Or, you know what, we're not going to lean in now. We'll lean in when this happens. And I think that's what makes the school system a better place, when we're in response to families and their certainty around who they are and what they need. I think there's been a lot of confusion at times because that hasn't been fully declared. So when you rely upon other entities to define your wellness, it can get really compromised. I haven't given a parent workshop within this last year. I've spoken to, I've been a Count Laurie nowadays. Nothing much has changed. We still have our evening community meetings, plenty of them. So I've spoken a lot at community meetings, but I think in the working with parents and helping them become greater agents within their home, I think one thing is around understanding their own wellness for them and their children, and then advocate and use the school community to help replicate that or represent that, so that transitions, like when we are going back, because I know the fall is going to be even more intense than we're experiencing right now, that you're really getting what's wanted and needed for your family, because there's no backseas on this either, because this is only moving in one direction, right? We are going to be a school system in a post-COVID world. And, there's a lot of things that were lost, and there were also a lot of things that were gained. Everything, it was not, we tell a lot, we tell the deficit story a lot, but a lot of things were also gained during this time. And I'm sure families learned a lot about who they were and who they can be, given whether it's remote or we did the blended piece, and how resilient we are. And within that resilience, you get to actually tell a new narrative around what social emotional wellness looks like within your home, and transfer that back into the school community.
Thank you, Maury. Your answer sort of moves us to a new topic. So maybe I'll ask you to start by telling us a little bit about things specifically you've seen in schools getting started with mindfulness, or something specific you've done at home. I know you've referenced a broader spectrum of things, but are there a couple of things that you can share that are tangible to get a family or get a school or a classroom teacher started?
Well, I'm very proud to be the roots of our nation's only yoga and mindfulness training program within a public school. About over a year and a half ago, before COVID hit, Brooklyn South and Brooklyn North got together as one borough, and we enrolled our borough president in supporting us in creating a yoga school. Because at that point, this is way before COVID, it was even a thought, we just knew that it's in the social emotional wellness of students. And we were also, that real learning takes place. We were looking at suicide ideation and attempts that were happening throughout our part of the city. And we knew that it wasn't only within Brooklyn, it was becoming like this alternative at times for children to even tap into. So our desire to go towards creating more opportunities for wellness within yoga and mindfulness, and create this school opportunity where teachers, leaders, and educators within New York City would be trained, go back to their respective spaces, and be able to do it with their students and their communities, has now evolved. So Cohort 0 graduated last January, just in time to be the healers of their meetings and schools during this season of COVID. And we just recently relaunched another cohort. So we are now at Cohort 1. So we're at the end of, I think it's by July, there'll be now about 70 educators trained within this. And it's great because it gives schools agency to not have to worry about hiring outside. They have their folks who are trained and certified within. So I start there for school systems to start thinking about, well, how are you building opportunities for folks to be certified within yoga and mindfulness, so that the social emotional resources and resourcefulness lies within the school community. Yes, it's been expensive, but in the long run, it won't be expensive because we'll have folks who are trained. So right now, Cohort 0 is training Cohort 1. So our need to use outside resources the way it was with Cohort 0 has financially and significantly diminished. And we're hoping that with every cohort that we bring in, it's going to have that same effect until eventually all schools in New York City have members of the immediate community who are trained in this and can pretty much work the whole entire school community, parents, teachers, and students in mindfulness and wellness instruction. So that's one thing that I've known that's worked really well. The other pieces are around what really constitutes really good leadership. Communication and letting people know that you see them and you hear them and that you experience them. And because of that, you're able to bring them into your community. I mentioned in my last response, having parents do tours, see what's going on in the school community since we've been through this pandemic piece, right? There's a lack of trust and there's a lack of security in knowing that if I send my baby back to you after they've been remote all year, what are you as a parent, what are you as a school community guaranteeing me as a parent? So it's through communication streams. So whether it's, doing things via social media, actually bringing them in for a physical tour and utilizing those spaces that you actually help build that language. So there's a commonality and there's a common understanding between the school and the home that, hey, this is what we're doing here and this is how we do it. And also having your children, the students, be the ones who are the ambassadors of the learning. Children are like among the best enrollers there are, right? So when they start doing things like, Mom, here's how you can calm down after a stressful day. I'm going to teach you this breathing activity. And I'm going to teach you this yoga pose. It builds and it heals not only within like the school community, but it heals within the home. And that back and forth is what we're looking for. Because I really don't believe that post this experience that we're going to be able to go back, right? So there's going to have to be a new conversation around how social and emotional supports and wellness occurs in the space. And I think that while we may understand the leadership skills that are required to create, a great school and so forth, the conversation is going to have to go towards what does healing look like? What does restorative look like? And then now let's operationalize this. And as a student, I have my tools. As a teacher, I have my tools. As a parent, as a leader. And because we all have this, we all are resourceful within our tools. We know how to build language. We know how to create systems. And we have now a culture of how we engage in social emotional wellness as a school home family. And I think that that's the vision that I'm standing in when I'm thinking about, okay, but we're starting a meeting off. Before we start the meeting off, what type of meditation do you want to do? Is it going to be a sound meditation, a laughter meditation, mindfulness and breathing? What are we doing to launch the meeting, right? Or when moments happen that are so intense, like what Jazz talked about in her first response, we have these really intense moments that make us type A and really wound up, that there's somebody in the room who's going to say, stop, before we move forward, I just need 3 deep breaths. Because that is what creates the shift, right? There has to be people in the room who are trained up enough to know this is the skill that's needed right now, not going on to the next part of the agenda, not going on to the next question, not going on to the next assessment. We need to pause for a second and do a warrior pose, because right now we are being so powerful. We got to honor that with our body, and let's all do it together, because in community, more things happen in an accelerated pace.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I feel like I'm even more prepared to do some things that at home that are not always as easy to do as when you're doing it at work. So I'm going to pose the same question to Hashina Baez. Maybe tell us a little bit in your experience, ways that people get started, and then we can flip it to Jazz Comboy talking about how this work plays out for things you're involved in that help support district leaders and superintendents. So I'll turn it to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. In a very practical way, there are 3 things that I do with everyone with a face when it comes to mindfulness. The first thing, when I'm sitting down with a group of students, I'm asking them very simply, identify your 3 most audacious hopes for wellness in your life. And then identify your 3 deepest fears as it pertains to wellness in your life. 1 for yourself, 1 for your family, and 1 for your school community. When I then shift to the parents, I ask them the same thing. Identify your 3 most audacious hopes as a parent as you support your child And then identify your 3 deepest fears. When I speak to teachers, I do the same thing. When I speak to principals and superintendents, this idea of excavating their hopes and fears is the first step to really understanding how they can conceptualize a vision of what wellness would look like, feel like, and sound like. And when we think about that, the next level is to now let's set a mindful intention for ourselves, for our families, for our learning community. And in order to do that, even at the meeting level, as a former principal, every faculty meeting began with a mindful intention. I would use a quote, perhaps a Brene Brown quote, about how sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is show up, and ask them, how are you showing up? How can we cultivate and create a mindful intention so that we identify how we want to feel in this meeting? That right there prioritizes this idea that feelings and emotions matter. How you feel and how you show up is going to very much so dictate how you are actually engaging in this meeting. So by doing those 2 things, and then creating the capacity for the 3rd step, which is probably the most powerful step of all, you want to be able to co-create or co-author a vision for wellness in their life by allowing them to navigate. Why do they tend to stick to or draw themselves to certain emotions, and why do they tend to reject certain emotions? Whether this is personally or professionally, we begin to create systematic ways of building emotional intelligence, cultivating mindfulness, and ultimately creating a culture where physiological wellness is not only honored, but is encouraged. So what are you doing physically, even for your body, to create presence in this moment? So very simply put, the idea is that this is a holistic approach, really pulling a lot from Shine's work on how you can build sustainable organizational culture so that every stakeholder understands that they absolutely have a chair at the table.
Thank you.
And Laura, I think I want to just go back to mindfulness and the crisis and the pandemic that we're in. And Maury, I loved what you said about, I need 3 deep breaths before we move ahead or before we make the next decision. Because the one thing that I've observed during this entire pandemic with educational leaders is you have a set of rules that you're operating under. You make a whole bunch of complicated decisions that you begin to implement, and then the rules change. And then you shift and you set a whole nother group of parameters and you begin to implement those. And maybe the very next day, the rules change. Like, it has been the one constant that we have seen all year long, that the rules have changed, that the people in schools who need to implement the rules are not the ones creating the rules or making those decisions. And so, I come back to what I said earlier. I mean, it has been fast forward, full speed ahead, high pressure, high stress, high stakes. Parents and teachers and administrators who just have, so much pressure put on them, and communities that are looking for answers. And one answer is good today, but it's not going to be good tomorrow, right? So how do you continue to sustain the level of leadership that you need to sustain to keep going, to get through this year? We're not at the end of this year. There are a whole bunch of new decisions that are going to need to be made. There are a whole bunch of decisions that are going to be made this summer. And there's a whole bunch of decisions that are going to be made about what's school going to look like in September, right? And no one's going to know, and we probably won't know until the very last minute. We won't know until it's too late. We won't be able to properly plan. So I think that really thinking about self-care and how do you take care of yourself? How are you going to sustain this, marathon, high-speed chase that we're in? And again, you just can't do it without taking care of yourself. I mean, you've got to figure out how to sleep and exercise and eat well and take those mindful moments so you really are making the best decisions you possibly can in the moment before the rules change again.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Jazz. Sorry. I was just thinking that taking a little turn, I know that the council and Vren wanted to put into the chat an article on toxic positivity seeping into schools and what educators can do. And as you're all talking, I'm thinking about how schools shortly will shift again. There'll be more students in classrooms. There'll be more activities that are more crowded, and there's going to be a little hesitation and concern as we maybe move in this direction to have everyone back into school. And sometimes there's a gut reaction to just be positive about things and be very full on having students coming back or positive about every single thing that happens, when in fact there are valid concerns that we want to honor, pause for, and really give students space to do that, teachers space to do that, and administrators space to do that. So I wonder, as things maybe go back to what is more normal in terms of school practices and coming fully back into school, are there things that we can do to sort of recognize the concerns students, adults, or supervisors are having as they return to what is more normal for school? I don't know, Hashina, do you want to take a start?
Absolutely. We know that the idea is, I call this a favorable season, right? And when I say that, people always look at me funny, because the idea is we want to create the conditions to prepare them now. We don't want to wait until, as Jazz mentioned, the day before, or when the system feels like they're ready to usher us in. What we can do in this favorable season is really begin to cultivate that psychological flexibility that I mentioned before. And in order to do that, we really have to be able to have a moment to just vision, right? Allow folks, allow parents, allow teachers to envision and surface some of those dormant ideas, some of those dormant concerns that are deep down inside of them. Let's name them so that we can tame them. Let's call them out. Let's not cover them up, because whatever we resist will persist. So if we know this already going in, we want to be so mindful to expose it. And once we do that, we can actually, again, co-create and co-author a plan of entry that's going to feel good mentally, physically, and emotionally for our teachers, for our families. Maury spoke about giving parents the opportunity to take these tours. We want to start doing that work now. We don't want to wait until the fall. We want to figure out a way, if we got to open these buildings on a Saturday, open the buildings on a Saturday. Show them what's there. Show them what we can do. Whatever we need to do, this is the time to do it, family. We want to be able to understand first, as a leader, there are several things that we can ultimately begin doing right now. As a superintendent, it becomes super important for us to think about, what is our wellness approach for the fall? What are we going to cultivate? Are we going to look to developing something intrinsically and internally, or are we not going to recreate the wheel and look to organizations like the Contentment Foundation that has a comprehensive plan and approach for adult well-being, for student well-being, for community well-being, that has that ability to tap into what families need? We want to put those things in place now, so that we begin training teachers on how to develop these social emotional learning skills and techniques, so that when the fall comes, students are able to dive into this learning. We can't expect teachers to come ready in the fall if we don't start now. So in very short response, Laura, the idea is we need to begin now. We can't wait. And most importantly, our students can't wait.
Yeah, and it also needs to be strong enrollment of some key players so that the work can actually move forward. So I mentioned the yoga and mindfulness teacher preparation program that the DOE has in New York City. And I think about Borough President Adams, who was such an amazing supporter and continues to be an amazing supporter to help us fund for it. But he himself is a practitioner of wellness. So it wasn't an easy sell, but it was an understandable sell because he gets the work. I think how powerful it would be if we got in New York City, so we don't have boards, we have mayoral control, but how amazing it would be to get members from the mayor's team, members from the central offices who are key players. So like I'm at the table and it matters because when stimulus funding came in, and like, what are we gonna do with this money? I was like, well, we've got this amazing yoga and mindfulness teacher preparation program that needs to be funded for at least 3 more years. Can we use our package to help bolster our social emotional learning with this money? And I get to put it in there, and that's the significance of being at the table. But it's also about who are our parents, who are, you know, the president of the president's council, the head of our PTAs, the head of our CECs, our local community boards. Who are those people, and how do we bring them in on understanding what it would look like to do a 30-day challenge of mindfulness and yoga, and give them a space in which they can practice, and then come back and say, you know what, this is something that I can see working. I think what happens is people don't know it and they don't value it. And, you know, people spend money on what they value, right? And if you don't value it, you don't know it, you won't do it. So it sounds like, okay, now we're going to take a moment of mindfulness. And it's become kind of like this catchy thing at times to do. But if you've done it and you're a yoga practitioner, you're a mindfulness practitioner, you probably have stories, everything from how your body has changed to how your finances have changed to how your relationships have changed. And people won't know that until they actually do it. So I think a part of the responsibility as we get ready to acclimate back in full time is to give people the experience and help them be able to say, you know what, because I'm trying this, because I've done it for 30 days, right? It takes 90 days to make a new habit. I get to see and experience it. And I can tell you, this is where I started. And these are the accelerators in my life, because I think it's very powerful for a child to have gone through a mindfulness or yoga training program where they are in a moment of crisis. And I've seen this happen where kids are in crisis, and because they've been exposed to this type of work, they know how to de-escalate themselves. There's a social media footage going around of a big brother helping his little brother get himself back in check through the use of yoga and he was using mindfulness actually and breathing to help his little brother. I mean, those are skills that are going to be needed for this time. So, you know, the teachers get an opportunity to have it, but once the children understand, imagine being able, that's so powerful for a child. And so, and we've done it where curriculum and instruction is considered, right? So we will say that, you know, I think about John Hattie's work, where the child who's actually able to understand where they are succeeding and where they're making the mistake in their own self-regulation of their own academic learning, that is the most powerful learner. It's the same thing around social emotional supports and wellness. The child who understands, oh, you know what, I am being triggered right now, and I'm possibly going into crisis mode. And I can use ocean breath breathing because I love how it sounds like waves, and it calms me down. And I can ask my teacher for 10 minutes to go sit in the wellness corner and take a couple of breaths and then come back, say, thank you so much for that. So no one's made to be wrong, you know, because that's the other thing that happens too. When children are in crisis and the adults don't know how to manage the crisis, they make the child wrong. And when the child gets wrong, is made to be wrong, all kinds of isms come into play and children get marginalized. So it's not just like the power of positive thought and Stuart Smalley and I'm nice and people like me. It's not that. It is really a powerful tool. I mean, think about ourselves as adults, right? We've all been in that situation where somebody does something and you want to tell them how you really feel. And how you manage that determines a lot around how successful you walk away from that situation. Some of us suppress, not a good move. Some of us hold ourselves back, and then we go talk about the person over drinks, also not a really good move. That's not a healthy thing to do. And some of us have the tools, and we can say, you know what, when you did that, this is how it made me feel. And I really want you to think about that. And I'm going to think about why it made me feel that way. And I would appreciate it if you wouldn't do it anymore. That's a different type of power. It's a different type of request. And being able to teach people how to do that just through, and it doesn't take a lot, a 10-minute mindfulness session every morning before the day starts, after lunch. How are we, a pulse check on how are we feeling? You just took a test. How are you feeling? Oh, yes, it's time for 6 movements of the spine. Let's get our body moving. Like, those things are not long. However, they provide a healing agency that is really needed in this post-traumatic stress world that we're going to be walking into.
Thank you so much, Maury. Both you and Hashina mentioned a couple of resources of places to go. If you don't mind, while I turn to Jazz for a minute and see if she has anything to add to anything you've said, if you could drop those links or anything into the chat that you think might be helpful for those watching today. Jazz, do you have anything you want to add?
I think just as a final word, we really need to listen. We need to slow down and, listen to what do people need? How can we move forward? What does our staff need? What do our students need? What do our parents need? I don't know that we've really had the time to slow down and ask those kinds of questions and really listen to how people have both suffered and how people have had successes through the pandemic as well. And so I think if we can just try to find those moments in that time to really listen and allow people to be heard. A lot of times that's just exactly what people need. You might not be able to fix it, but you can listen and you can make people be heard. And I think we all need to hopefully try to find a little bit of time to do that as well.
Thanks. So I'm watching our time. I want to squeeze in 2 quick things. One, is there any fast idea that you do for yourself? Just a quick thing that you do for you that you'd like to share with the people listening today? Any one of you?
Yeah, I mean, breath is really important to me. I think it's something we all walk with, and if you're walking around, you've got it. So something as simple as deep breathing, taking it in through the nose. If you want to go really extreme, out through the mouth, but you also can go out through the nose. The most important things about deep breathing is when you're breathing in, you're filling your entire body. So you should feel the expansion of the stomach, the expansion of the rib cage, the rise of the chest, and let it all out. If you do that 3 times, it can calm you down in any situation, easily done standing up or sitting in a chair.
In harmony with that, affirmations I live by. Every morning I say the same thing to myself. I've been doing so for the past 10 years. So the daily affirmation is to speak what you seek until you see what you said. And after I say that, I remind myself that I am enough, I have enough, I am worthy, and I'm worth it. That's it.
And I'm a huge believer in sleep as part of your self-care. And this year I found the do not disturb feature on my phone. It goes on automatically at 9 o'clock at night, every single night. I have those people, those starred people who can get through the do not disturb, but it sounds so simple, but it has changed my life. So I see nothing coming through my phone after 9 o'clock at night. I sleep better. Try it, just try it.
Well, thank you all for all of those. I really appreciate the opportunity to moderate and talk to each of you and really get to hear all of the great things that people can do right away or can build over time and the resources. And I know there's so much more to offer. So I will spend these last couple of minutes. Maybe Hashina, you could start. I know you mentioned, or I'm aware of, that you're having a mindfulness chat coming up. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, where people could get more.
Absolutely. I'm excited to welcome everyone on this call and any other folks within your district to a Mindfully Led Leadership Conference that I'll be hosting on May 25th. The link is in the chat. It'll be at 4 p.m. We look forward to seeing all leaders, all educators, parent coordinators, everyone with a face who believes that they have a stake in mindfulness and cultivating and curating conditions for growth and wellness for students, you're welcome to attend. I would love to see you there, May 25th at 4 p.m.
Thank you. And Jazz, I know you have a women's initiatives, a group of sessions coming up. Can you tell us a little bit?
Sure, we'll be doing, and I dropped it in the chat. I don't have the link right with me, but we will be doing a spring series. It will be 4 sessions of our women's initiative, and we'll have a variety of topics. We're doing one on capital projects, we're doing one on interviewing, a few other topics. So please join it. It'll be virtual. 4 sessions over the course of the spring, and you can find that link on our website at www.niscus.org.
Maury, I don't know if you have anything to share in terms of upcoming events. I know you.
So our biggest events in the DOE are open. That is what our Chancellor Porter always says. We are, as I said before, we've opened up our elementary, middle, and high schools. And of course, we're looking at summer school and a strong fall reopening. And I would just say, for families, just to be in touch and being in communication with the school community around what's that looking like, what's happening, and being just strong advocates. I mean, the only way we get better is by hearing the stories. I have been really moved and have gained, even though I'm living through it myself, I'm a mom myself, going through it with my own too. It's awesome to hear from families and know what their stories are. So I would just say, within the space of what summer school looks like, within the space of what a strong fall reopening looks like, please continue to share your families with your respective community leaders, your respective education leaders, so that we can have a better understanding when we're sitting at the table, what's really, truly wanted and needed.
Thank you, Maury. I know Dr. Steele was on at the beginning for all the great introductions. I don't know if he's available to come back on and tell us a little bit. Thank you for coming back. I know the Hochsprung Center have some other upcoming events. Maybe you can share them with everyone.
Thank you, Laura. So we do have 2 more Hochsprung Center webinars, again, focusing on this past year and the pandemic and COVID-19 and its effects on our school community. On April 28th, we have the topic is pivoting during a pandemic, systems and structures to respond to COVID-19. Our panelists will be Clarence Ellis, Elizabeth Wood, and Angelina Maloney. Our moderator will be Doug Huntley. On May 19th, we have the topic is Revelations and Resolve, Equity and Access in the COVID-19 Pandemic. Just talking with a lot of my doctoral students, both, especially in New York City, equity and access has been a major concern. And I know Maury alluded to that earlier in today's program. So that'll be specifically on equity and access. And our panelists will be Ebony Green, Hua Tu. These are doctors from our program, and Dr. Patrick Jean-Pierre, who's an adjunct who teaches one of our classes on equity and access in our program. And the moderator for that event on May 19th will be Dr. Oliver Robinson, the superintendent of the Shenandoah School District. So again, those will be coming up later in April and May. Today's program, I have to say, just listening to the discussion was absolutely amazing. The ideas that, all 3 of our panelists have provided to, our audience were amazing, and it really comes down to doing those, it may seem simple, but they really are simple things that you can do every day to take care of who you are. And if you are able to do that, then you can take care of others. So I think that's the important message. This webinar will be on our Hochsprung Center website, as they all will once they're complete. And I just want to thank NISCUS, Vren Banks, Lynn Wells, Janice White, and Marlene Zakerski, who have been planning these since, I think, December or January. And I think it's an outstanding series. And I think you're, again, have shared a lot of great information today. And I especially want to thank Laura for her moderation of the discussion this afternoon. Really kind of pulling out some of the maybe more nuanced ideas that were presented today, and allowed the panelists to share those. So thank you very much.
Dr. Steele, do you
Yes,
think we could have Hashina do a couple closing breaths before we
yes,
leave?
maybe so. Hashina?
Absolutely. Absolutely, family. Let's sit in a way that makes us feel comfortable and confident. Let's allow our feet to just melt into the ground beneath us. Our hands can just simply rest in our laps. At this time, allow your backs to be straight but not stiff. I'll invite you to close your eyes so that we can go within. As you breathe naturally and normally, pay attention as each inhale simply turns into an exhale. Let's remind ourselves in this moment that there is no other place that we need to be. There is nothing else that we need to do. We are exactly in the right place at the right time. To begin, 3 communal breaths. We're going to center our minds and our hearts on the thought of abundance. As we begin to breathe in, let's breathe in self-compassion through our nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We tilt our head back. We take in another deep breath. Hold it a bit longer. And let's release that self-compassion back into the world from our mouths. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As we return our head back to center, we're breathing naturally and normally, reminding ourselves in this moment that we are enough and that we have enough. Let's prepare for our second communal breath, this time breathing in self-awareness through our nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We tilt our head back. We take in another deep breath. We hold it a bit longer and release that self-awareness from our mouths back into the world. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Returning our head back to center. We're breathing naturally and normally, this time reminding ourselves that we are worthy and we are worth it. Let's prepare for our final communal breath. This time, let us breathe in self-actualization, breathing in through our nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We tilt our head back. We take in one more deep breath. Let's hold it the longest this time and release that ability to self-actualize from your mouth. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Returning our head back to center. We're breathing naturally and normally. We're checking in with our bodies and realizing that we are a bit more relaxed than when we've begun. All of the muscles in our face have softened. All of the muscles in our bellies have softened. We're reminding ourselves of abundance. We're reminding ourselves in this moment to be present to everything that we do have in this world, in this life, and ourselves. At this time, I'll invite your awareness back into the space where you are. You can feel the ground beneath your feet again. You can feel your lap beneath your hands. When you are ready, willing, and able, I'll invite you to open your eyes. Thank you, family.
Thank you, Hashina. What a wonderful way to end this webinar. Thank you so much to all of you, Laura, Hashina, Maury, and Jazz. Thank you once again on behalf of the Hot Springs Center at Russell Sage and the New York State Council of School Superintendents. Thank you. Have a great evening and rest of the day.